Hello there, everybody. Thank you so much for stopping by and spending some of your precious time with me. We are here today to talk about the Justice Tarot card and its meanings and the meanings of the Justice card in reverse. So, as usual, we will be looking at the Rider-Waite version of the Justice card. We'll also be looking at several other versions of a Justice card from other different decks. There are lots and lots of decks out there. The decks that I have on my table are not all of them, but they give you kind of an idea of how a different deck can give you a different flavor or a different take on a card. So as a professional reader, I just think it's important that somebody who does read professionally have multiple decks, just because you want to use the deck that's calling out to you for each particular client. They may need to hear their message in a little bit different way, or maybe even a little different message sometimes than what, just you would only have with just one deck. So having said all of that, also let me say that if you have not watched my video about reading the tarot cards psychically, the beginner's guide, you definitely want to check that out as well, and I'll have it so that you can click on that at the end of this video. So first of all, let's start with the start. This is the Rider-Waite Justice card. You can see that this is a person who, has the balance in one hand, has the sword in the other hand. They are trying to make a fair decision. They're trying to go about it as fairly as possible. The sword, does indicate air sign a lot of times. Sometimes in a reading, this can actually indicate somebody who has a Libra sun sign or possibly a Libra rising sign. I find that in my readings, a lot of times the rising signs come up more often than the sun signs, so I typically stay away from using signs in my readings, but some people do, and if it works for them, yay, good for them. I'm happy for them. So if you're one of those people that you would use that, then this would be a sign, this would be a card that would be indicating Libra. Okay, so trying to make the most fair decision that somebody possibly can. Also, in some justice cards, you're going to have a blindfold over the person. In the Rider-Waite, notice there is not a blindfold. That means that this person is considering all the facts, considering them in a fair and just way. Okay, now, la da da da. Just checking on a blindfold on this one. Next, we're looking at the Russian Tarot of St. Peter's. And this looks more like a female who is the justice person here, or the judge. She does look like she has a blindfold on. So it's interesting how that can come across, because for me, not having a blindfold on does mean looking at all the facts. Having a blindfold on, for me, sometimes it comes across as this person is trying to be as fair as they possibly can. Like if you've ever seen videos on taste tests, and people are comparing Pepsi to Coca-Cola, then you don't have the labels where somebody can see them. Maybe they are blindfolded as they're tasting to figure out which one they like better. So that's kind of what sometimes a blindfold will mean to me. It'll come across to me in the feeling range as this person is doing everything in their utmost power to be as fair as they possibly can. And other times the blindfold will come across to me as there's something that somebody is not looking at. There's something that somebody is not considering, or they're refusing to consider. And so because of that, they're making a tainted decision. So that really depends a lot on how the card feels. It doesn't depend on whether it's upside down or right side up. It just depends a lot on how the card feels. At least for me it does. Everybody's got their own different language, but for me, that's the difference in those nuances. Now, this is another example of one that has the blindfold on. You can see she's got the scales on both hands. She's got the feather in one scale, the sword in the other. And so both of those indicate air. Once again, this card does indicate a Libra if we're looking at signs. So this does indicate air, but obviously the sword or the dagger, whatever that is exactly, is going to be heavier than the feather once it hits the pan. So this person, once again, blindfolded, trying to be hopefully as fair as possible, but depending how it feels, may not be looking at something, may be coming up with a tainted decision. A lot of times a justice card will talk about court, talk about judges making a decision, but many times a justice card actually talks about somebody who's the head of the family making a decision, somebody at work that's either a supervisor or maybe a union leader making a decision, somebody who's in a position of authority making a decision that influences your life, and this decision is about you, okay? All right, let's look next. We have the Druid Craft Tarot. Justice once again depicted. This is a little bit more interesting to me for some reasons. Now, the first thing that jumps out at me is look at the helmet that this person is wearing. It's like, okay, I'm trying to be protected. Like, this person basically knows that some of the decisions that they make may not be very popular. They might have to do something to defend themselves once they actually let someone know what the decision is going to be. Thus the helmet. Thus the helmet. Okay? And the sword, once again, sign of Libra, but the sword talks about thoughtfulness, being analytical, being logical, not getting your heart into this decision, just making this decision based on the bottom line. The owl there speaks of wisdom, that this person is using a lot of great wisdom. So this might be somebody who has some experience. They've been around the bend a lot. Before you can be a judge in the United States, you have to be a lawyer first. I know over in Germany you can be a judge because you're elected as a judge, and you can really have any profession and be elected as a judge over in Germany. I met a guy who had served a term as a judge when I was stationed there. And, in that case even, I mean, he had been around the bend. People in his town trusted him to be able to make good, solid decisions. And if you'll notice in this corner, bottom corner, there's a spider making a spider's web. A spider making a spider's web is very strategic to me. There are patterns, there are planning, that is not something that is by happenstance. So that also indicates, that this person is being very strategic in whatever decision they're making. They're looking at long-term consequences as well as how that impacts today. Okay, so really nice depiction of the Justice card there as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so this is out of the Good Tarot, and we have the Justice card here. Once again, we have a sword. We also have the scales. This Justice person has wings, so this might be like the Angel of Justice. This might be a representation of karma. And I will tell you that a lot of people feel like when the Justice card comes up, that this talks about a karmic situation where you have done something that in the past that has brought these consequences around that are represented by the Justice card. It's because of something that you've done in the past. Now you're paying the price or reaping the reward one way or the other. So this can be a card that for a lot of people talks about something that's very karmic. I don't so much see it as karmic. I don't really so much believe actually in karma as most people do anyway. Maybe a little bit of a different version possibly. But a lot of people will read this as more of a karmic card or, getting your just desserts for something that you've already done. Excuse me for a moment, please. Sorry about the interruption, but now we're back, and the next card that we're looking at is the Tarot of the Golden Wheel, and this is the Justice version of their version of the Justice card. You can see, not exactly sure actually what she's holding in her hand, tell you the truth. It looks like some kind of incense container, but in her other hand she has the sword, and the sword is, to me, it represents the law. Like, it can cut both ways, and whatever the decision is, if whenever somebody, whenever a judge makes a decision, it's in somebody's favor and it's in somebody's to somebody's detriment. So this talks about the sword cutting both ways, and I think this whole idea of her holding the sword up centered in front of her suggests to me this idea of hiding behind the law almost. In fact, not letting her personality influence the law. So, not letting her opinions come in between the law and the decision. So this really indicates to me that she is making decisions based on what is legal, what is right, what are the preset rules that have been put out, that, she's making a judgment. Are people following those rules that they're supposed to be following or not? She's not letting personal feelings get in there with her hiding behind that sword. And the sun behind her talks to me about the idea that, she has some clarity, she has some understanding, she has all the information as she's doing this. And even with this incense in her hand, tells me that she's taking this very seriously. She's asking for divine spirit's help as she's making a decision. Interesting take on that card as far as justice. So we've got a few more interesting takes, of course, right? The woodward is what is called the justice card, or what the justice card is called in my Wildwood Tarot. And with the woodward, you can see that in one hand, this person has a cup, a goblet, and in the other hand, they have a primitive version of a spear, but it's got blood on it. And, there is the assistant, the cat, right there, company, and also very wise, very balanced, and the eagle behind him. So, this person is protected as they're making decisions. And with the eagle, they're also communicating with Sacred Spirit, asking for help and making the best decision possible. This person realizes the gravity of these decisions. And so this really, to me, talks about the story of somebody really looking at a situation and trying to figure out, based on the information they're given, trying to figure out, with the situation that went bad, did it go bad because somebody intended it for it to go badly? Or did it go in a bad way because somebody was doing something ridiculous and it got off the tracks and then they didn't know how to fix it and bring it back? Just straight up lost control of the situation out of ignorance. So I feel like with this card, that's what this feels like to me. A lot of times this is a position that parents are put in when they're trying to figure out what's going on with their kids. Do they mean to be misbehaving, or did this just end up much worse than they anticipated? Like, do we need to have, some counseling on how to handle these situations in the future, or does there need to be discipline? And so this is kind of the energy that I see in this woodward. He's not afraid to use a discipline if he needs to. Obviously, there is blood on that sword. But he's also willing to give compassion when necessary. Otherwise, he wouldn't be holding the goblet in the other hand. Okay? So there is that. Now, with the Chrysalis Tarot, Justice card shows up as Mat or Mat. I'm not exactly sure on the pronunciation of this. This is an Egyptian goddess, basically. We have fish underneath, so it looks like she's sort of sitting on a dock. And then there are birds and things around. We've got the two feathers, but this talks about this whole idea of justice. And we've even got the lion there. So once again, then there's this element of defense with that lion there. There's the element of communicating with spirit to help find answers and to have help in making a decision with the feathers connected to the arms or the wings connected to the arms. We're not looking at an angel. We're looking at somebody who is, just trying to figure things out here. And so this is the Justice card for this deck. La da 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 da. Now, Medicine Woman Tarot. Justice shows up as balance here. And what we're looking at here is basically a balanced ecosystem. We are seeing a few people. We're also seeing animals. We're seeing a field. Mountains in the distance. Water in the distance. So this talks to me more than about justice like you would find in a court, but the idea that there is justice in nature, that there's always balance in nature. And so if I would look at this, then this would talk to me more about the idea of things falling into place the way that they need to fall into place in a way that balances everything out. Possibly karma, if you want to look at it that way. Possibly this could be talking about karma. What I think about when I look at a picture like this is the first summer that I was living in the foothills of the Rockies, there were a lot of fires. And there's fires out there pretty much every year. But there was one that got especially close to the town that I was living in. And so a lot of us were driving up the mountain that basically was across the ravine from where the fire was. Or the foothill, I should say. No, it was mountain. Excuse me. Anyway, I digress. But what we did is we got a good view of what was going on. We could see where the fire was headed, what was happening with the fire. We could also see where the firemen were, the fire people, maybe I should say, were. We could see the helicopters dropping the sludge on the fire, and how effective that was or how effective it wasn't, just depending. And so it was really an interesting thing for me because I had never seen that. And this scene with the whole sense of balance brings that back to me because that land, was suffering with that fire, coming over it and just wiping out the things that were there on it, the trees, the grass, all of all the flora, not to mention the animals having to, get out of the fire's way, the little spiders and all the little critters and everything else. So at first glance, this fire seemed bad, just bad. But after winter came and I came back up to that same lookout point and was looking in the area, it was very easy to see, well, after winter had come and gone, it was very easy to see where that fire had been before, because where the fire had been, the grass was much greener and much more lush and much taller than where the fire hadn't been. So there was that balance there. There was that reward of the land had dealt with that fire. Now the land was being rewarded with whatever it was that that fire put into the ground to help make the plant growth more lush as it came back and recovered. So this reminds me of this. This is kind of that balance of, things might happen that are bad, but then things come around that are good as well. Not so much like the Wheel of Fortune, more in a way of definite cause and effect type of situation. Excuse me a moment. Okay, so now we're going to go through and we're going to look at justice reversed. So with justice reversed, this is what this is going to look like whenever it shows up in front of you. Justice reversed in general just tells me that somebody has made a decision, somebody with authority that has influence in your life has made some type of decision that impacts you in an adverse way, and or that they made this decision in a tainted way. They did not look at all the facts. They were coming at it with some kind of prejudice. And so for me, this is not a fair decision. Now, the other thing that justice in reverse, well, let me back up because this is a meaning I did not mention with justice right side up. Justice right side up can also be the breakup of a couple. It can be a divorce, but a lot of times I see it in the breakup of couples that haven't actually even made it to marriage. And when justice straight up is the breakup of a couple, this is a situation where, and I have other cards that really tell me more about divorce. That would be like the Chariot in reverse. But justice straight up means that with this couple, there has been an unequal dynamic. There has been one person who has been giving more into that relationship and who is more invested, and there's another person who is not giving as much to the relationship. They're not as much invested. They are taking the relationship for granted, and they're kind of coasting their way through this thing, okay? Sometimes they're not even coasting. Sometimes they're just dragging the other person down because they're doing so little, and maybe even they're doing things that damage the relationship continuously. Okay, but either way, it's not an equal relationship. You have someone giving a lot more to the relationship than somebody else. When the Justice card comes up and it's a breakup of a relationship, it's going to be a relationship like that, that's uneven. And this is going to be the person who is putting in more energy or effort into that relationship deciding that they're done, that they have done everything they can. They don't know how to make anything better, and they are pulling back their energy. They're no longer giving to that relationship. So therefore they are the ones that are calling it done. They're calling the breakup. Okay? So when you've got Justice in reverse, this is actually exactly the opposite of that. This is still a couple with an uneven dynamic, and it's still a breakup, but it's the person who has not invested in this relationship that is calling it quits. And I see this as an unfair decision because this person hasn't even really given the relationship a fair shake, and they're calling it quits, and the other person has been putting everything they have into it. So to me, this is not a fair decision. So it comes up like this for me. Justice in reverse is that person that wasn't really that invested anyway, in spite of the other person's energy and efforts, calling it quits for a relationship. Okay? But otherwise, this is just in general, this is a decision that's made in an unfair way with or with a negative outcome, and a lot of times both at the same time. Okay, so really same thing with this card. This card is very similar, and in this case, this might be something where the blindfold might call out to me a little bit more often in the Justice reversed, in the cases where there are blindfolds, as somebody refusing to see something, somebody making an unfair decision because they refuse to see something. Maybe it's a decision between a family member and a neighbor, and they refuse to see that their family member has just been a horrendous jackass to the neighbor. Maybe they just can't fathom that. They can't see that. They refuse to see that. So yeah, things like that come up. If my attention is drawn to the blindfold, it's not always. Sometimes it's not. If it's not, then this is just an unfair decision that was made in a tainted way, made with prejudice. Okay. Now this one is pretty much the same way, but this also can say with the feather and the knife, obviously having different weights, this one can really say to me that somebody did not present their case well. Like if this went before a judge, somebody really did not present their case as well as they could have. Maybe they didn't know how. Maybe their lawyer was, not up to snuff. Something was going on where they were not able to present the facts that they needed to present to get a fair case, but the case was made in an unfair way for whatever reason. Doesn't have to be that reason, but that would be sort of the flavor I would take away from the Justice card out of that deck. Justice card in this deck, if it shows up in reverse, could be that, we don't have a blindfold on. There's not a refusal to see something, but with that owl there, this could be that the judge just really didn't comprehend, or whoever's making this decision, union manager, supervisor, judge, family, head of the family, whatever, whoever's making this decision, they just didn't have the wisdom to be able to make a good decision. Maybe there's somebody who's a little younger, a little more immature, and hasn't, they're not able to see the big picture as easily as somebody who's been around a while. Okay, so still an unfair decision, but one that may be made just out of basically ignorance more than anything else, of not being able to really understand the situation and comprehend it in a good way. This Justice card just really says that this did not work out well. Also with that, sometimes I want to call this the sun, sometimes I want to call this the moon. Right now I want to call it the moon when it's in reverse, actually. With that moon in reverse, just tells me that, this is I feel like this judgment call or this decision that was made by somebody, I feel like this may have you really reflecting on the whole situation and kind of looking at, okay, well, where did I go wrong, and trying to find fault in yourself, even though the judgment was corrupt. You may not be recognizing that that judgment was corrupt. You may be thinking, well, there's something wrong with me that this happened, and I just need to fix it. Okay, so self-esteem could be taking a beating on this, really reflecting on yourself. And, you know, you could end up reflecting on this long enough to come to the conclusion that it was an unjust decision. But if your self-esteem is really down and you're making this reflection, maybe this is something that this card would indicate that you need to know, that you wouldn't be picking out all by yourself. Okay? Now, justice in reverse here. Once again, we have this woman hiding behind the sword, or hiding behind the law, hiding behind the rules, the regulations, whatever that is. Hiding behind the truth. For me, this is more of a situation where somebody probably made a decision that sticks to the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law when it comes up in reverse. So this would be like, yeah, technically that was an appropriate decision, but there were kind of extenuating circumstances that this person doesn't give credit for in this card. And so thus the unfair decision. Even though technically it was correct, nobody could fault them book-wise. There's just extenuating circumstances that made a big impact and probably should have been considered. All right, now we're looking next at Mr. Woodward in reverse. Now, to me, this talks more about confusion than it actually does about a unfair decision. So this could be the court taking extra time to make a decision, or, you know, the patriarch or matriarch or the supervisor or the union leader or whatever. This could be somebody, you know, with a position of authority taking some extra time to make a decision because they're really confused about which way they should go. That's generally how this card comes across to me whenever it shows up in a deck. And this is the perfect example of why you need multiple decks when you're reading for somebody, because you want to make sure you pick out the right deck for them that's going to bring them the correct message. So you want to pick out their deck intuitively just as much as you read the cards intuitively. Now, next thing that we are looking at, this is the Egyptian version, Mat of Justice. And this, to me, I just see, when I'm looking at this card, what I see is I'm really looking into it and reading the energy. It's almost like those wings there, where she's holding up those wings. So I see them, you know, she's in this position. As I'm looking at that card, they kind of go like this to me. They go like that to me. So the wings switch position. So to me, this really, whenever she's in reverse, this talks about a flip-flop of reality, a flip-flop of the truth. Something that was expected did not happen, and something unexpected did. And because this, I mean, the original meaning for me, for the base meaning for this card, is that this was an unfair decision. I think it was an unfair decision. I think it also was a surprise that it came into you. Okay? And then last of all is my balance card. That would be justice in this deck. And this just talks about things not working out in a way where people are recompensed for what they've put into something, whether it's good or bad. But this would be like, you know, really investing heavily in somebody else's business with an expectation that you would receive some profit from it, and no money comes back. Maybe they lose everything. That's not really fair. That's not a fair way for things to work out. This, for me, is not so much of a decision card, by the way. This is more of a how things work out, cause and effect, action and reaction type thing. And so when it's in reverse, the reaction that you should be able to expect, logically, doesn't actually come through for you. Okay? So that kind of gives you an idea about different ways that those justice cards can be read, whether they're right side up or upside down. I hope that you guys find this video helpful. And if you do, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with somebody else who may be able to benefit from it as well. And for those of you who would like to schedule a private reading or a private Reiki session with me, all the information about how to do that is on my website. Also, all my contact information is there. So if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. I don't charge anything, just to answer questions if you want to know how a reading or a Reiki session works with me. Okay? Thank you all for being here. Everybody have a fantastic day. And if I don't see you for a private session here before then, I'll see you all back on the next video. Peace out.